So the record is now on. I'd like to welcome everybody to our session today. We're very excited about it. We're hoping to get through quite a few things, so just keep that in mind as we're going through. If you do have questions throughout the session, I would ask you to type them in the chat window. That's going to be the easiest way for me to see them. If you would like to raise your hand at any point, you can use the technological raising of the hand, which if you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, bring up a window that has commands at the bottom. One of them is raise hand. That is how you can raise your hand throughout the session. But again, I would ask that if you do have a question, if you can post that in the chat area, that would be most helpful to us. I would also say if you can remain on mute throughout the session unless you are speaking, that is most helpful in terms of background noise. So we appreciate you doing that. All right, so let's get into it. First of all, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are going to be talking about a number of different things, but primarily how to kind of expand your career as an ADR professional by using rosters and expanding your toolkit as a neutral. And with me today are Dick Fincher and Sarah Miller Espinosa. They will be our primary speakers. I'm here to primarily moderate and assist with discussion. And so I'll introduce us and I'll also let them introduce themselves a little bit. My name is Katrina Nobles. I'm the Director of Conflict Programs at the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution in the ILR School at Cornell University. I've been in the field for about 17 years and I came to the Institute about 10 years ago. I have a specialty in interpersonal disputes as well as cross-cultural issues and difficult conversations. And I work with organizations on conflict across the organization and integrated conflict management systems. Richard Fincher is the managing partner of Workplace Resolutions LLC, which is a national dispute resolution practice offering mediation, arbitration, systems design, ADR training, and multi-party facilitation. He has mediated and arbitrated over 1,000 commercial and employment matters. He also serves on several panels across the country, as well as serving in leadership roles in organizations such as the National Academy of Arbitrators. Richard also is an instructor, and he instructs in Asian Studies and Dispute Resolutions at the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution at Cornell. And he also instructs in our professional development programs for becoming a professional mediator. He also was a Fulbright Scholar in Law and Dispute Resolution to Vietnam. Sarah Miller Espinosa is a labor arbitrator, mediator, and certified organizational practitioner. Sarah is a member of a number of labor arbitration rosters and panels, and she has also served on various permanent arbitration panels. Sarah is also one of our instructors at the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution in our professional programs for becoming a professional mediator. And she also has taught courses at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Montgomery College, and again at the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution. She's a member of various professional organizations and was also the founding impartial ombuds for both the Montgomery College and Prince William County schools. So that's just a brief introduction to our panelists for today. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. If you can give me a thumbs up, if you can see that, great. Okay, so we have gone through the introductions. So the learning goals for today is to go through why and how to join neutral panels and expanding your neutral practice with a larger toolkit of services. Our target audience for today are workplace practitioners considering retiring or shifting their practice to ADR, emerging workplace neutrals early in their careers, and established neutrals who wish to expand their income and toolkit of ADR services. With that, we're going to be presenting the business plan, joining rosters, and expanding your toolkit. So again, Sarah and Dick will likely be introducing themselves a bit more at the beginning of their presentations. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dick to start the business plan discussion.
Thank you, Katrina, and welcome everyone. We're thrilled that you are here and will be participating throughout this program in terms of your questions on this important topic. The theme of what we're talking about is broadening your practice, but why? What would be the reasons why you would want to broaden your practice in ADR? And there are several that I can think of. The most obvious one would be to expand your income. Typically, the more cases you have, the more revenue you bring in each year. But another reason is to diversify your practice between the federal sector or the private sector. And the more diverse your practice, the greater the safety net you have in terms of your overall revenue each year. Another reason why you would want to broaden your practice is to experience the intellectual process of doing something different than just mediation, doing ombuds, or doing conflict coaching, or doing facilitation. Each of those are intellectually interesting and a reason to consider broadening your practice. And the last reason you might want to consider broadening your practice is to offer add-on services. For example, if you are a mediator with a client and the client says, could you do conflict coaching? The answer could be yes. So you would have additional tools in your kit. And that's the phrase that I use and many people use, sort of like a carpenter. You have tools in your toolkit, but the broader your toolkit, the more income that you might have. So the decision to expand your practice should not be made impulsively. Instead, it should be part of a business plan. And what is a business plan? It's a written document. It's a roadmap. It's sort of a vision as to where you want your practice to move from point A to point B. And here on the screen, you get to see several aspects of the business plan. But the most significant point is, if you're a mediator and you want to become an arbitrator, what are the qualifications? What is the competition? Are there mentors that you could find that would help you become an arbitrator? Generally, what is the market? So for each product that you would like to sell, or for each service, you need to ask yourself those questions. And ultimately, how does broadening your practice fit into your business plan or your vision? Okay, Katrina, next. So there are many ways to broaden your practice, but the most obvious way, and the question that I get the most, is how do I join rosters? What are rosters, and exactly how do they work, and would they be a good idea for me? And my experience is that joining rosters is an incredibly valuable means to increase your workload and your income and achieve some of those other goals. Next slide. So what are panels? Why are some wonderful and others are not? I am on some panels that have delivered tremendous value to me over time. And I am on panels that have delivered no cases and have been a complete bust. These are the different types of panels that exist, but ultimately a panel is a list of names. It might be 5 names, 10 names, maybe 20 names, but it's a list of neutrals that has somehow been created. Sometimes they're mutually agreed between unions and management. That's very common. Or sometimes they're selected by agencies. For example, the Postal EEO mediation program is selected by the agency. Civil service boards are selected by the agencies, not by unions or management. Where I live, the Civil Service Board has 5 hearing officers on its panel, and the Postal EEO mediation here in Arizona has just 10. So this gives you some idea of exactly what a panel is. It's a list of names. Next slide. is there a master list of panels that you can go to? And unfortunately, the answer is no. I have never seen any kind of a resource or a depository of panels for workplace neutrals. I wish that there was, but there isn't. But there are closed panels and there are open panels. For example, a closed panel means that even though you're qualified, you may not be able to get in. And the American Arbitration Association is an example of that. On the other hand, the FMCS arbitration panel isn't open, meaning once you're qualified, they will let you join the panel and you can start receiving referrals. There are also panels that are periodically open. Every 2 or 3 years, the Postal EEO panel, the EEOC, there are 2 of those, 2 different panels. They are not open all the time. And lastly, some panels require different mediation styles. For example, the Postal EEO requires that you be a transformative mediator, not an evaluative mediator. And some of the other federal panels also require the transformative style. Next. Is there an application fee? Generally, no. Is there an annual fee? Yes. You will have to pay an annual fee to the AAA or to FMCS. And is there a requirement for continuing education credits to remain on the panel? For the AAA, the answer is yes, and you pay for that. Do some panels limit your fee? Absolutely. It doesn't matter what your fee is. If you're a mediator for the Postal Service, they pay basically $550 a case. It doesn't matter what your hourly fee is. For the Civil Service Board, they pay $150 an hour. So this is all different. And do panels limit your cancellation? Yes. Most of us have 14 or 21 day or 30-day cancellation periods. But in many of these public sector panels, you don't have any cancellation. Next. So I'm going to very quickly move through the rest of the slides. If you want to become a labor arbitrator, these are pretty much the essential panels that you need to look at. Unfortunately, the application process is different in each one. For example, teacher panels in New York City are a different organization. Teacher panels here in Arizona are a state-run process. Next. We're now moving to the subject of employment mediators, and you notice that there's public panels. I think I've covered many of these. Cornell University with Katrina manages the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission panel for whistleblowing cases. Most of the others have to do with the EEO discrimination cases. And Carol's program with the Department of Interior deals with just a wide variety of employee conflicts. So there are public panels for employment mediators that you should consider if that's the direction that you want to go. Next. And there are private panels. AAA is the most obvious one. AAA probably has, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 panels, and I'm on 3 or 4 of them. Through AAA, I am on several company internal conflict systems, hotels and restaurants. And then, of course, if you're a retired judge or a prior litigator, you might be able to join the JAMS panel, which is probably the most well-known and most lucrative of all of the employment mediator and arbitration panels. Next. So in summary, why are panels so important to your career journey? For the reasons that we talked about earlier. They diversify your practice. Some years I make most of my income from the private sector, and other years I make most of my income from the public sector. There is, of course, the intellectual aspect of it, but the idea of being almost guaranteed 4 or 5 cases each year on panels is just a significant step in terms of your success. So with that, I will turn it over. Thank you, Katrina.
Okay, so I'm going to take just a couple minutes here before we move into Sarah's presentation to take any questions that anybody has. So again, I would encourage you to put any questions in the chat area if you could. If not, you can also raise your hand and we can just call on you. I see no questions yet. So not to worry, as Sarah goes through her presentation, once we get finished with that, we'll do a bit of breakout groups so that you'll have the opportunity to do a little bit of more intimate conversation around the topics. So let me go back to sharing my screen here, Sarah. And then I will let you take it over.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Dick. And thank you all for being here today. When we talk about the why and the how to expand your neutral practice with a larger toolkit of services, I think that Dick has really already covered the why you would be wanting to do this. I will just note that, as you know, especially in these extraordinary times, right? When we're meeting here on Zoom virtually, when we thought that we would be all together meeting at the conference, you never know what's going to happen in the world. This is the most extreme example I can think of. You never know what's going to happen in the world. And so diversifying your toolkit of ADR services can be very helpful when things unexpectedly happen. And I'll just share with you, my personal experience has been that since we've all come indoors or stayed in our homes, my labor arbitration cases have all been pushed, right? People are postponing and rescheduling, settling. My mediation work is now starting to pick up, although at first it was postponing as well. But my ombuds work continued pretty much undaunted very quickly because we were able to really move into a virtual meeting environment, and that particular part of my practice continued. So I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so there are all different types of ombudsmen. There are classical ombuds who may work for typically legislative branches. There are advocate ombuds. You may be familiar with those in healthcare settings. Today, I'm going to be talking about organizational ombuds. And organizational ombuds are really people and resources that an organization has hired in order to assist constituencies in informally resolving any type of concern that may arise. And so you're a neutral who has been embedded in the organization, either as an employee or with a contract, and you typically may be working with either employees or customers of the organization. I'm going to give you an example of some different ombuds programs in different sectors in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about how an ombuds does their work. So an organizational ombuds typically will practice to the code of ethics that the International Ombudsman Association has promulgated. And there are 4 pieces of this. And as mediators or arbitrators, you're going to recognize many of these. So the first is impartiality, of course, and ombuds is a neutral. The second is confidentiality. So confidentiality, really in the Ombuds Code of Ethics, you don't tell anybody who's coming, the identity of who comes to see you, or the specifics of what they're coming to see you about, unless they give you specific permission to do so. The only exception within the code has to do with a serious risk of physical harm. the ombuds is also informal, right? So it's not part of any formal complaint process or grievance process within an organization. It's a place for individuals to come and have an informal conversation where the ombuds can help them identify what the issues are, what their interests are, and all of their options. And you do that in part by providing information about the various formal options the person may have to pursue, depending on what the issue is. But you really help the visitor, that's what we call people who come to see us in the ombuds world, you really help the visitor make their own determination about how they want to move forward in resolving whatever the conflict or concern is that they've brought to you. And finally, you're independent. So as an independent person, either working in some capacity for an organization, you're in a really unique role, right? So typically an ombuds is going to report to the highest levels of the organization, and they are not going to share with those highest levels the identity of the people who come to see them either. But what ombuds are charged with doing are collecting data about the types of issues and the types of visitors that are coming to the office, so that the ombuds is in a position to be able to spot systemic issues that may be going on within an organization. And this information can be invaluable to the leadership of the organization in determining what steps should be taken, what, if any, steps should be taken in order to improve the culture of the organization, the climate of the organization, or address systemic issues and equity issues. Now, I'm going to give you a few examples of ombuds work from my own experiences. So the sectors that you may most typically find ombuds positions in include higher education. And higher education, there are a number of colleges and universities who have ombuds offices. These ombuds offices sometimes serve students, they sometimes serve employees, they sometimes serve both. In my experience, I started my ombuds work at Montgomery College, which is a multi-campus community college outside of Washington, D.C. And in that role, that ombuds program was developed collaboratively with the unions that represented the faculty and staff, the college governance systems, and the administrators of the college to really be a place where we could resolve conflict at the lowest possible level within the organization for employees. So that program was specific to employees. I also have served as a contract ombuds for an association which accredits other organizations. So there are some small employers who sometimes will hire ombuds in terms and really don't have the number of employees or the number of constituents that would in any way justify having an ombuds on staff, either part-time or full-time. And so there are contract opportunities for ombuds, especially with those smaller organizations or organizations who just would like to protect the independence of the ombuds by having them on contract rather than as an employee within the organization. And finally, there are, not finally, but in my experience, there are also ombuds there's a growing sector of ombuds in the K through 12 world. And here, what my experience has been is that K through 12 sector is recognizing that there are, as you know, any number of conflicts going on within it, and that an impartial, confidential resource can really try to informally resolve some of those issues. And so I have currently been serving as the founding ombuds for the Prince William County Schools, which is in Northern Virginia. There are 91,000 students, 11,000 employees, and anyone can access the ombuds office: parents, students, members of the community, and employees. Although I will say, in my experience, employees have been accessing the office at a more rapid rate. There are also ombuds in the federal sector, and there are corporate ombuds as well. We can go to the next slide, Katrina. So how do you learn about these ombuds opportunities? First, you may want to consider, if you're interested in doing ombuds work, investigating the training opportunities that the International Ombudsman Association offers, particularly their foundations course. That really is the course that gives you the grounding to transfer a lot of your skills as mediator into an ombuds environment. So I would suggest looking at the International Ombudsman Association. They also have job postings at the IOA. There's a blog that all ombuds seem to look at, and most ombuds positions and opportunities are posted on. So that's the ombuds blog, and you have that information there. So there are also conference ombuds opportunities, which is a little bit different. So organizations have been hiring ombuds to come to their conference to serve as their ombuds for that particular conference, so that the attendees have a neutral party to check in with when they may be experiencing any sort of concern or conflict at the conference. And so that's a new development in terms of short-term ombuds opportunities for employment. We can go to the next slide, Katrina. There are a couple other areas that I hope to touch on in regard to other conflict resolution services that you may be interested in offering, including facilitation. And this is really impartial facilitation of groups of people to help them identify, better work together, identify what their common objectives and interests are, and plan how to achieve those objectives. So really, as the facilitator, you are the process expert. You don't take a position on the whatever the content is of the group or the meeting. Next slide. So there are all types of different organizations that might be interested in facilitation and do utilize facilitators. A lot of colleges and universities will utilize facilitators to facilitate their committee work. There are boards of directors that have, and boards of trustees that have facilitators that work with them. I've done some of that work for some small boards, not-for-profit boards. There's group facilitation for various private businesses, and you'll find some of that work with the human resources departments in those organizations. And there's also, of course, interest-based bargaining, where you're facilitating collective bargaining and a particular approach to collective bargaining with unions and management. And that is another, I know that Dick has done a lot of that work. Next slide. Briefly, I also wanted to mention a few other areas. There's conflict coaching, and that's really where you're serving as a neutral and doing one-on-one work with an individual to prepare them to be able to work through conflicts that they may be experiencing, particularly in the workplace. There's also training, as that's also an important thing to add into your toolkit to be able to do training, because often my experience has been, if you're doing mediation, people may ask you, you know, could you provide a training on a particular discrete subject? And then I wanted to also mention conflict management systems. And here, depending on your expertise, you may have some opportunities to help organizations either design or audit their conflict management systems.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I saw that we had a few questions already coming in the chat, so I'm going to relay those. So one question that came in was to explain the process the ombuds can investigate under the terms of the Code of Ethics.
Sure. So for organizational ombuds, and this is different than classical ombuds who will do investigations and issue reports, organizational ombuds do not conduct formal investigations, and they don't get involved in formal complaint processes. So an organizational ombuds is not going to conduct their own organization for their particular organization. What they're going to do is they're going to help the visitor identify what are your options for resolving whatever the conflict may be. For instance, if you're the person has a conflict and a concern with how their supervisor is treating them, you're going to go through a list of available options from do nothing to file a formal complaint or engage in litigation. And you're going to discuss that range of options with the visitor.
Great. And if there's any additional questions on that, feel free to put that in the chat as well. There's also a question about, is the fee structure different for each service?
Yes. Dick, do you want to talk about that? You're on mute.
So the answer is absolutely. It's almost mind-boggling how each practice area has a different fee structure. Labor arbitration has a daily fee structure, as you know. Employment arbitration has an hourly. Mediation typically has an hourly. Conflict coaching has an hourly, but it's not the same amount as employment mediation. I did interest-based facilitation for years at a community college, and that's a different fee structure. So it's confusing, and you really need to stay on top of your billing process to ensure that each client is being handled differently. Thank you.
Dick, did you just want to talk a little bit about what interest-based facilitation is?
Sure. I did interest-based facilitation at the community college level for 6 years, and I did it at the high school level for 5 years. And it uses a lot of the skills of mediation. You're obviously standing in front of a group of union and management people, and there might be 20 or so, and you're helping them work through the various issues that arise from a collective bargaining agreement. So it's not the adversarial model, it's more of an objective, fact-based, facilitated model of how you work, how you consider issues, what your interests are. It's heavily option generated, and it's a wonderful way for people to make money if you're an effective mediator. And there's not a tremendous market of people doing interest-based negotiations. So I would recommend it if it's something of interest. Sarah, anything else?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, and one last question. Are there less cancellations from parties using permanent panels? I noticed in the chat that one person in the group responded, not in my experience. Dick and Sarah, any thoughts on that?
You know, my experience is yes, but it just depends on the panel, and I've never done the math. Marty, I don't know if you have an opinion as to whether permanent panels have lesser cancellation than non-permanent. My perception is that permanent panelists may be more sophisticated, but certainly they have cancellations. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
My experience is permanent panels, people tend to be a little bit more respectful of your time because they recognize that you have an ongoing relationship with them. So they're not the kind of people who are going to equate till whatever your cancellation fee is, and at 4:30 the day before tend to cancel as much. That's just been my experience. Because they just recognize that creates some bad will. If you're going to settle the case, why not settle the case in time so that Dick or Sarah or Katrina could encumber the date with something else. And ad hoc, there may not be as much sensitivity to that.
Great. All. I don't see any more questions in the chat for right now. I don't see anybody's hand up currently. And I do want to be cognizant of the time. We're running into almost down to 20 minutes left here in our session. And we did want to do breakout groups. So the breakout groups, I'm going to break us into just 2 breakout groups. since we have a lower number of participants right now, and I don't want to put us into, just pairs or triads here. So I'll split us into two groups. You'll go into a breakout room. You'll notice that a message will pop up asking you to join that breakout room. You do have to click on join to go to the breakout room. I'll be here in the main room to make sure there isn't any questions or anything. But what we're hoping the breakout rooms will allow for is deeper discussion on your own experience, your own experience with panels, your questions about panels, your questions about kind of broadening what you're doing, and maybe some of the implications on how the last few months have been going. As for instance, Sarah mentioned, a lot of her arbitrations have been pushed, but her ombuds business has been continuous. So talking about some of those differences in the time that we're living in right now would be great too. And you're going to have about 10 minutes to discuss. And I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left, 2 minutes left, etc. So you'll know when I'll pull you back into the main room here. So the invitation to join the breakout room will pop right up in your Zoom screen, just so you know that. It's not like an email or anything like that. It'll pop right up where you are. So any questions on that specifically? Just want to make sure before I hit the button. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and send everybody to their breakout rooms. Okay. Oh, let me just make sure. I'm going to have Sarah in one of the breakout rooms and Dick in the other breakout room to facilitate the discussions. Okay. All right. You should be receiving an invitation now.